welcome to the Seahawks 360 podcast, where we look at the Seahawks from every angle every week. I'm Candace Higgins,
And I'm Tino and Candace.
and we are back together to discuss the Seahawks for the first time in the year 2025. Happy New Year to everyone who is listening. We're super excited to be back talking Seahawks, even if it's not under the best of circumstances. Tino, there's been a lot to happen since you and I last talked together. It's been some wins, some losses, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately where we sit right now as we go into week 18 is that the Seahawks have no way to make the playoffs at this point. They have been mathematically eliminated, and the only thing they are fighting for at this point is a slightly better record at 10-7 potentially. And they'll be playing the Rams, who will be sitting their starters because they did win the NFC West. And now they are looking for the chance to basically create a bye week of sorts. Tino, where is your head at? There's been a lot of talk about this team, the success of Mike MacDonald. It's kind of been the natural topic since the year, playoff wise, is pretty much taken care of. Where do you stand on this year where's as a whole, I guess, before we get into some of the nuances of the next game and such?
I think overall it's been a successful year in that Mike MacDonald, I think, has proven that he is already and going to be an even better coach, right? He is a very good coach already. This team has an identity on the defensive side of the ball, very much so, I think, at this point. Um, they've acquired the kind of the cornerstone off-ball linebacker that he needs for his team. The draft looks like, for the most part, it was a success. Byron Murphy's been good. Tyrese Knight's been good. AJ Barner is serviceable. Looks like we might get a guard out of the sixth round. So, you know, a lot of the peripheral things I think have been done, and the defense is established. I think the offense still in week 18 does not truly have an identity. I don't know how much of that is personnel and how much of that is coaching. I tend to land on the personnel side myself. Um, the offensive line, I think, has shown its true colors, right? That line needs to be redone completely. I also think it's interesting that we are going into this offseason with real question marks at the quarterback position, which obviously is the most important position on the team. But I think the bones of, you have the questions about, say DK Metcalf, is his future as a Seahawk, right? Is he worth it, quote unquote? Um, but and this is just me. I know that I'm a little weird in this way, but I would rather have a defensive identity and build an offense than have an offense identity and build a defense. And then this is what Coach MacDonald is about, right? Is building a team around a defense. So this is the building block. The other thing is, in a building block year that I would call rebuilding, and they wouldn't openly, but I think in some ways this is what it was. You might get to 10 wins. A 10-win season where really, truly not a lot went well is, to me, very successful, right? And I think it says that sky's the limit for this team. So I think there are positives. I don't think it was a resounding success by any means. But this is a team that I think we can be excited about for next year. There are things to look forward to, but this season, I believe, is going to prove to be incredibly pivotal. Decisions to be made at the quarterback position, one way or another, right? And in my opinion, again, if you are not going to bring in a new quarterback to replace Geno Smith, you need to have a succession plan, and it needs to either be in place or they need to know they're acquiring that quarterback in the next offseason. And then the offensive line. We've seen with this team, you cannot win without a say average offensive line. And if it's average, everything around it has to be perfect. Um, and then, there's specific questions we can get into in the offseason. I think you have to ask yourself a question about who is Reek Woolen truly, right? You have to ask yourself a question about the defensive line and how many of these pieces are going to be permanent and how many aren't. There's going to be the Boye Mafe question soon. So there are a lot of questions that are to be asked. But all in all, the team has a defensive identity, which is what the head coach wanted. There's a ton of talent on both sides of the ball. And I think tweaks need to be made, and then the offensive line, the quarterback need to be answered.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to fall in line with a lot of what you said for the most part. I do too feel like this year is a success, and I personally don't care. I mean, I do think there's a lot of reasons why they need to win this upcoming Rams game, more for optics of other people. But in my personal opinion, this 9-8 is not the same 9-8 that we've had in years past.
Mm,
You know, it's interesting some of the narratives that have come out. We're mediocre, but in a different way. One, I would just like to say some of our biggest frustrations as a fan base was continuing to lose the same way. Like, I don't know why now, if it looks, even if we are, even if I did digress the point that this team is just mediocre, I would still say it's meaningful to be losing a different way when that
yes,
was some of the biggest complaints. We were tired of losing the same way for 3 or 4 years. And,
right.
and now no one cares about that because it's not, you just barely missed the playoffs. I've seen a stat going around that the defense played the second hardest schedule in total DVOA,
Mhm.
in terms of the offenses that they had to play this year. They
Mhm.
did so by changing personnel in the middle of the year, literally having players quit in the middle of the year, going on a
Right.
4-game losing streak. So, like you said, they had a ton of things going against them. And despite that, they are fringe top 10 in almost every defensive metric. I
Yep.
went and compared a lot of it to last year, where the biggest complaint was the rushing, right? The rushing defense was DOA. Got it to 18th, despite us being frustrated with games and Josh Jacobs being Josh Jacobs on this team again. Despite these moments where we felt like here we go again, it still landed out at 18th
Right.
compared to 31st last year.
Right.
It landed in sixth actually in rushing touchdowns allowed
Yep.
compared to 30th last year. And so
Mhm.
there's just these giant things that I think the context is missed by. I also feel like this team played a tougher schedule than they did last year. They blew a Steelers game. They barely beat a Titans team. They what was his name? The Browns got the quarterback, Josh
Oh, Josh Johnson? No, or
no, he's
DPR?
bald. Or maybe it wasn't the Browns, but he was like a bald guy. He was like a backup. He went to the Vikings. I'm not sure.
Oh,
Can't remember his
Dobbs,
last
Joshua
name.
Dobbs.
Yes, Joshua
Yeah,
Dobbs. Thank you.
yeah,
Playing guys like him. I mean, the schedule and what it took to get to maybe 10 wins this time, but even let's just say it's nine, I think was a much tougher road,
well,
frankly.
well, think about, to me, the difference is you can go 9-8 and have no future, no excitement. You go 9-8 with an old team. You can go
Correct.
9-8 where your stars are going to be free agents.
Right.
Go 9-8 with no injuries. You can go 9-8 where every unit is okay, right? You can go 9-8 without young players to be excited about, or you can go 9-8 with a defense that's very much on the ascent with a whole bunch of young guys, right? Where your off-ball linebacker stepped in the midseason and played lights out as a fourth round rookie, right? Where you have a defensive tackle in Byron Murphy II, who I think has all pro seasons ahead of him. And then you can go 9-8 or 10-7 with an offensive line that was hands down the worst offensive line in football. And a quarterback who I think it's okay to say now is an average at best quarterback, right? Who I think has digressed a little bit or regressed, excuse me, a little bit. I still love Geno, but I think he threw enough picks, specifically in the red zone, to start to ask some questions about, is this really the answer? Anyways, my point is you have places where you can get so much better, right? This running game was virtually non-existent except for that huge Charbonnet game, and a couple
Right.
others that were okay. You
Right.
can build a running game. You can come up with an offensive identity. You can improve at quarterback, right? There are a lot of places this offense can improve, and the defense was very, very good, but it wasn't great yet. But if some of these young guys, say Reek Woolen decides to take his offseason seriously, and he comes in and he's the Reek Woolen of his rookie year, and you couple that with Spoon and Murphy gets a little like there's when you're 9-8 and you have all of these things to improve upon and look forward to, it is a completely different feeling. It's like it's apples and oranges, right? And so
Correct.
yes, when people get upset about us being, average again, I don't think they're looking deep into it all. And I think they're looking to complain and not trying to see what's actually going on.
Right, because context does matter. And there are not many coaches in history who can say they got to win double digit games in their first year. I mean, this wasn't a Super Bowl caliber team when he got it. Even if you say there was some talent that was there, it's not like he was gifted, this wonderful roster. He still had to make a ton of changes to the roster, even mid-year. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the more frustrating narratives I think I've heard a lot is just that this team is going nowhere fast and we've got to make these massive changes. I think we're closer than ever because it had been since 2017 since we've seen a decent Seahawks defense, like literally even just an average
Yep.
Seahawks defense. We've seen this offense be top 10 with the same personnel. So I think that for even though it was a bad year, I think in terms of how much meat was left on the table, it really was a lot that they could have done that they did not do, and we got plenty of time to talk about some of those things. But you've seen just as recent as the year before last, this team operate as a top 10 offense under who we thought was what a really bad coordinator and is currently not in the league, Shane Waldron of all things, with still a terrible O line, with still who some people feel like is not a guy at quarterback in Geno Smith. And so for me, that's what gives me optimism. Like you said, you're okay with having a still having to create an offensive identity. I'm not exactly saying I'm not there. I'm not at that place where I do think I guess where I land is more, I'd like to see the more problematic issue be solved first and then take care of the issue that we've seen more recently produce and tweak that. I think offense in the modern NFL still wins at the end of the day. That's literally how they set the rules up to be at this point in the year of 2025. But that's where I land. You needed the biggest leap at defense, and frankly, all of your resources went to the defense. Is it really a surprise that the offense did regress when we basically said plug and play this and didn't really give it any additional reason? I mean, not no significant changes happened other than paying Noah Fant way more money at the
Right. Well,
offensive like unit, but mid-season trades, many of our high draft picks went into fixing the defense. And so take that focus, put it in on the offense, and I think you can see a very different team.
right. More specifically, even I'd say put it into the offensive line. If they
Yes.
come back, if they come back with no changes on offense outside of, I'll even leave the tight end room alone. I don't love the tight end room,
I
but leave
certainly
the
don't.
tight end room alone. You know me, I'm good with AJ Barner as a blocking tight end, and that's all your tight end is. If I know you would disagree, I'm just saying, like the offensive line, if you think to your point, last offseason, we used a 6 on Laumea, we used a 6 on Jarrell, we used a 3 on Haynes. Sundell was a rookie free agent. Olu was an undrafted free agent back, before with a different team. Tomlinson they signed to that vet like garbage contract that
I
they
think
could give
Olu
anybody.
was fifth the year before, fifth round, I
Was he?
believe.
Let me
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
Anyways, the point is like you're right. Like look at what we traded a 2 for Leonard Williams and signed him to a big contract.
Hmm.
Derek Hall was a 2.
Right.
Reed they signed Murphy was a 1.
Right.
You go down that list, it's Mafe was a 2. Obviously, Witherspoon was 5th overall. There's just there. You're right. There are a lot more resources invested in the defense, so you would expect the defense to be better. I'm really yeah. It was a fifth. You're right. 5th round pick by the Seahawks in 23. Olu. I should have known that one. Um, but and I'm reactionary to Geno right now. Right. I think I watching him and I love Geno, but watching him frustrated me a ton.
Mhm.
But I also as you said, we've seen it from him as recently as I'd say truly 2 years ago, but last year he was very good as well. And I trust what the experts see, right? They see a guy who's really, really smart and makes very, very good decisions. I also think in hindsight, I'm guessing how many picks did he have? 15, I think.
Yeah.
I bet
17 picks.
you went back and watched 15 picks. If you went back and watched, I bet you at least 5 of those were the fault of wide receivers and their routes. I can think
Actually,
of
eight.
3.
Well, 10 total. Daniel Jeremiah, I'm not sure if you saw the clip, but Daniel Jeremiah did just that. He
Did
went
he
back and
really?
looked at the
I didn't
Geno
see it.
Smith interceptions, and he said I think 8 of them were tipped, or like batted to, tipped or like dropped by a wide receiver or something, like something funky happened. And then
Right.
2, he credited to DK Metcalf just running poor routes.
Bad routes. So
Right.
if you take those away and say of course he's going to have some of those, but say two of those tipped ones were picks, he's sitting on 7 picks, right? And I think the 17 touchdowns is also a result of it's a result of a bad line, and it's a result of I think a play caller learning how to call plays, right? But I don't know. I love Geno. I love his personality. I love how the contrast of Geno to Russ, like final couple of Seahawks years, Russ. Geno's what we needed, right? You needed a humble, smart, tough leader who wasn't going to come in and be all about him. And I love that about him. But I do think that, this year wasn't great. I think that 23 was good, not great. 22 was the year where he was a superstar as far as I'm concerned. So,
I wouldn't say all that.
he was. Go back and look at these stats though. Hold on, I'll bring them up.
Yeah, let me see.
70% passer, almost 4,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 picks, and a quarterback rating over 100. Right? That's a top
Top 5.
eight quarterback.
Yeah,
Top
top
five,
5.
top. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is he a different player than he was then? I'd probably say he's probably a smarter player. But I don't know. I still think the question for me is always, can you win a Super Bowl with that player? And I think with Geno, I'm on the fence. I'm not going to say no, but I don't, we've seen Joe Flacco won one, right? I think Trent Dilfer certainly won one, but I think we have to think about the future. I think the future of the quarterback position for the Seahawks has to be not the question in the offseason, but a question in the offseason. The question is the offensive line.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good point. The question is definitely the offensive line. Where I stand on Geno is frankly where I've always stood with him. Geno is a guy who has always needed the circumstances to be right to thrive. And if you get the circumstances right, he will thrive. And if you don't get the circumstances right, he won't thrive and he will look bad. And especially in certain situations, there's different situations that can make him look worse compared to others. But
Mhm.
his situation, it matters. And I would argue that for the past 2 years, he just hasn't had, I don't think, a good enough situation for anyone. I understand the skilled players are there, but we disagree on where we stand with Ryan Grubb. I don't think. I think Shane Waldron, frankly, did a better job of getting more out of this offense than what Ryan Grubb has, with a basically comparable offensive line. Seriously, I mean, I believe in fact that his pressure rate was slightly less last year than it was this year, but they're pretty comparable. So
Yeah, I would say though, you don't hire Ryan Grubb from the college ranks with very little big college experience without assuming that he's going to have like a steeper learning curve and a longer transitionary period. That would be my argument with him is if you expected him to be great out of the gates, I think you, meaning us, expected him to be great out of the gates. I don't think that that's realistic. I think this was a learning experience for him. And I think the conversations with him behind closed doors in the offseason, if you still trust his intelligence and you trust his ability to learn and him being open-minded, he could still be an outstanding offensive coordinator. I just think this hire, it has to be you have to have a longer vision with the hire because you're hiring someone young. The same thing is, you're drafting in basketball, you're drafting someone out of high school, right? They're not going to be great right away. They're going to need time to grow into being a star. And I think Ryan Grubb, because of his inexperience or no experience in the NFL, we have to look at him in those terms. Was he great this year? Heck no. Did he choke in a lot of situations? He did. But I didn't think he was going to be great out of the gates. Or I guess in hindsight, I can see that he wasn't going to be great out of the gates. Doesn't mean he's not going to be great in the future, in my opinion.
I would say then 2 points to that.
Mhm.
You're in a vacuum. I think you're correct. I also think that speaks to a very conflict of philosophy from the get-go because they hired their staff. They made the move from Pete Carroll with the expectation of taking a step forward because they felt like this team underperformed. So they wanted people to take them to the next level and to get the most out of the personnel they currently had. If that's true, then I think that was a conflict from the beginning. It's almost like the Warriors where they had like two timelines, right? Where like you got the young guys, but this team is ready to win now. If that's the case, I would say to me, I think that's a reason to move on just in and of itself because I think you're right. I'm not saying Ryan Grubb can't succeed in the NFL. I'm just not sure this Seahawks team is built to withstand some of the trial and error that you have to go through in order to get that. I don't think he's adapted quickly enough. I think he's had opportunities to adapt throughout the year, frankly, and he has refused to do that. To me, that is a giant red flag. I would also say it matters, I just said wins matter. Like the type of wins and the context matters. In a vacuum, yes, you want to give him time to figure things out, right? But I also feel like there were things that, like I said, just left on the table. And I also think there's a clear philosophical difference between who Ryan Grubb is at his heart and who Mike MacDonald is at his heart. I just don't see those two things. I don't see that being fixed, right? Because I don't think Ryan Grubb is able to find a middle ground with the run game enough. And I definitely don't think that it meets what Mike
Yeah.
MacDonald gets it. And I
Look,
think it's okay to say
hmm,
this philosophy doesn't work.
I don't think
That we
anybody
don't
knows.
believe in this playing the same kind of game.
I don't think we know what Ryan Grubb's philosophy is. Here's why.
You don't think it's
He
pass the
had one
ball,
of the historically worst offensive lines of all time. All time.
and he
He
still
had
passed the
two.
ball.
Okay, so you though check it out though. You sign a center who you think is going to be an above average center who quits and before he quit was horrible. You sign an over the hill left guard to a contract that's not worth much and you expect him to hold up and play well the entire year. You have an underachieving, underperforming left tackle who you're giving chances to in part because he was a high draft pick. At right guard, you have a third round pick who turns out to be a nothing burger, basically. And you're starting a sixth round pick by the end of the year who was raw as heck. And at right tackle, you went through four different right tackles over the course of the season.
How
So
was that
you
different
had
than the year before?
it doesn't matter. You also, Geno Smith played better last year. It could be that Geno Smith didn't play as well. DK wasn't as focused and didn't have the same kind of season. DK's head was somewhere else, right? K9 couldn't stay healthy. Like there are other factors outside of this offensive line and Shane Waldron that determine whether this offense was good last year and this year or not. You look at this, if I get hired to do a job or to be a coordinator or a coach, and I don't even love Ryan Grubb, but I don't think this is fair. You hire me to do a job and you give me the crappiest version of tools, like in the entire business, in the entire industry, and then you get rid of me because I wasn't very good.
Well,
But you
no,
give
this was still
me
a top 10 offense when he got it.
it,
It
no,
was
but
a
this
top 10
offensive
offense
line
when
was
he
so
got it.
different. These guys were so bad. The other thing is maybe the offensive line coach was the issue, right? Scott Huff was not good at UW. I don't know why they hired him. That offensive line that won the best offensive line in college, that award, that was because they had so much talent there. And it was because Michael Penix was such a great quarterback. And it was because they had three, starting wide receivers in the NFL as their three receivers. You cannot give offensive line is so important. I think it's more important than anybody cares to acknowledge. And people still think it's important. It's more important than that. You give an offensive coordinator who's new to the NFL the worst offensive line in football, nobody is going to succeed. There is not a single new raw coordinator out there who is going to succeed with an offensive line that is that bad.
I
The
don't think
offensive
it's
line was that bad.
I don't think anybody's asking for it to have been a top 10 offense again. But I do think that there were what was our biggest critique with Shane Waldron? He won't adjust. What did we think we were getting? The number one thing people were excited about with Ryan Grubb,
Adjust
that
to
he can
what?
adjust.
Adjust to what? What is he going to adjust to? Like, meaning, so what kind of plays could he have called in those situations to have done a better job, is my question.
Play action, under
With
center,
the bad offensive line?
triple, a variety of formations
I
that
love
work.
I love play action. I love play action. You can't run play action with a bad
Pistol.
offensive line because by the time the quarterback turns his head, he's sacked.
But Geno was the best play action quarterback in all of the league the year before
But I think I
with
think the
a
circumstances
comparable
were
offensive
different.
line.
The circumstances were different. Now, the point that I do agree with is, and this is just me being stubborn, is you run the ball, you have to run the ball a lot, even if you're not good at it, to be able to run the ball eventually. And you have to run the
They
ball to keep the other team off of you, right? Off
there
of
were games when Charbonnet averaged like 6.9 yards a carry, and they still didn't run the ball.
it's not Ryan Grubb's fault. It's not. And you don't hire him and invest in him unless you're going to give him a couple of years to grow into the job. That's my point.
I think you can say you made a mistake in getting someone that young. You're ready to win right now and move on.
You're not,
I
he's not
think
a
he can do
mistake.
fine in the NFL for another team that's rebuilding.
I don't think he's a mistake, and I don't think it's fair. If I was Ryan Grubb, honestly, if I was Ryan Grubb and you fired me, boy, I'd give everybody a piece of my mind because I'd be like, you set me up to fail. You give me an average quarterback, at best, and a slightly above average quarterback, a number one receiver that doesn't run precise routes, a bad tight end room, and an offensive line that's the worst in football with the fourth string right tackle, 2 6-round picks, an old washed up scrub at left guard, and a center who can't hold his water. Like, I'm gonna be mad. I'm gonna be angry that you got rid of me because I feel like I wasn't given a fair shot. That's me standing up for Ryan Grubb saying, if you get rid of him, you haven't given him a fair shot.
I disagree. I disagree. I think you can also say all of those same circumstances were exactly the same for a guy who's sitting on the couch and he did a better
They're
job with
not
the
the
same
same.
team.
What Waldron and Grubb are, oh, they're not the same.
No, they're not. But that's the point. If someone
Waldron's
who's
not.
considered a worse mind did a better job with the same resources,
Mm.
then you it's
The
not
players,
time. It's
the
not
players aren't the same, but the players also are not the same year to year. Reek Woolen, Rook year one versus Reek Woolen year two versus Reek Woolen year three, three different players,
you don't
right?
you,
Three different players year to year. Players change in their ability and performance year to year, in their focus, in their willingness to be present, in their all of it. It changes. The player who does not change in that are superstars, right? Witherspoon, is going to be Witherspoon every year because of what's up here. He's built different. A lot of players will change year to year as to whether they're good or not. And a lot of players will age and not be as good. I don't think it's fair to compare those two offenses and say same resources, Waldron was okay, Grubb's terrible. It to me it doesn't work that way. It's much more complex than that.
it's Grubb's new, and you don't, as a team, don't have you're not in the position to say, oh well, we'll just take our time with it, because you've got aging resources. DK is in his prime. The only person you really got that's not, frankly, is JSN and AJ Barner. Like everyone else is about to hit a contract on that offense. Everyone else is you're about to have to make some, like you just said, some critical decisions.
Mhm.
You cannot afford to, especially with what your defense just gave you, give 2, 3 years to potentially waste.
But you're giving 2, 3 years if you bring in an unknown as well, right? I think also the other thing with Waldron, he had a couple years. He had a couple years to establish himself, to get to know this team, to get to know his players. He had 2 years to coach the offense. In year two, he was better. You get
Now, in year two, he actually regressed quite a bit for most people.
okay, but he was still, as you said, better than Grubb,
He
right?
was,
But I think with the same resources. The point is that he had the same resources and was better in year two. I think
but he
you
was
can't
worse in
hire
year two.
someone and not give them a legitimate. This goes in for work too. I manage people, and it's the same idea. If I don't give you an opportunity to learn, if I don't train you and give you the resources to be good at your job, and I decide you're done, that's not fair to you. I got to give you the right training and the same opportunity that I gave others.
Well, that okay. Real jobs in the NFL are not the same in
No,
any
but
way.
no, but the premise is the idea is you give people an opportunity to succeed. You have to give them an opportunity. You have to give them the resources. You can't ask someone to build a house and not give them a hammer. And that's basically what they did with Ryan Grubb by giving him that bad of an offensive line.
Yes, he had a bad offensive line, but again, the offensive line has been bad the entire like for like 15 years. Seriously. The offensive line has been bad for 15 years.
I would argue this is the worst version.
It's just the worst offense since 2016. I
I would,
agree. It is actually statistically the worst
but
offense
it's
since
not, yes,
2000.
but it's not, it's just not fair to him. It's not.
You can say you made the wrong hire. You can say it's not a good fit. It's not even about can he do better in the NFL with better resources and opportunities? Yes. Can you afford to wait? I would say no.
Can you afford to bring in someone new and have no continuity?
Yes.
I don't think so. Not unless it's someone that
You're not
not
going to
unless it's
have
someone that's
continuity
gonna
anyway,
blow
depending
your
on
doors off in an interview and is completely brilliant. I don't think so.
you just said that they've got to redo this whole offensive line, right? You're not having continuity anyway. There will be no
You have
DK
continuity
may or may
everywhere
not
else.
be back.
You have
Geno,
continuity everywhere else.
where else? Geno may or may not be back.
You will be.
Uh, I think he will be too, but it's in question. Geno may or may not be back. DK may or may not be back. Your offensive line needs to be completely revamped. You probably are going to be moving off a toe. You might. It's a good chance that if they were looking to move some things around cap space wise, you decide to move on from Noah Fant. That offense, literally from a personnel perspective, is there's a good chance it looks completely different anyway. So to say that continuity is
I
the
don't, but continuity is not just about the players. It's also about being in the building. It's also about the relationship with the head coach. It's also about the position coaches. It's about seeing the same face there all the time. It's not, it's there's so much more to it, in my opinion, than just the personnel. And I would argue that likely, yes, I think there is a question about Geno. There's a question about DK, a question about fans, certainly all those things. Question about the offensive line. My guess is Geno's back, DK's back, and at minimum, your right and left tackle are back. And likely, Laumea is your starter at right guard. I bet you we see a new center and a new left guard and maybe a new right guard. But
they
those
need to.
tackles are going to be the same tackles, likely, whether I like it or not, right? And and I think I think Geno would play for 20 bucks. Honestly. That's
I
how Geno
don't.
I just do. I think that's how Geno is. He's
No.
a competitor, you
That's
know?
very sweet though. I don't think Tino is playing for 20 bucks though. I
If he can
like to
start in
think that.
Seattle or be a backup somewhere else, I think
I
he's
don't
taking
think I
I
don't
think
think
he
he'll
takes
be
a
a
Seattle
backup
job.
somewhere. I will say this. I think he has more options because of how dry the quarterback market is this year. I think in different years he probably would be a backup somewhere, but in a year
Mm,
where there'd be quite a few teams and it's just, slim pickings in terms of draft and even frankly in terms of free agency,
mhm.
I think he probably would have a little bit more leverage than frankly even I would like to admit. But all in all, yeah, I think we'll have to agree to disagree because I think you can't afford to put another year in waste. What is a very good opportunity. You said get an unknown. I don't think they need to get any more unexperienced NFL head play callers. Seriously, and go get you if Doug Peterson becomes available, get that guy. There are just quite a few. Mike Kafka, what's he doing? Like, just get some experience in here because I think there are some foundational things that can be done to fix the offense
He
that
has
just
experience. He had experience this year.
say what?
That he has experience. He had experience this year.
It wasn't a good one. Give me some.
But you learn from those, right? You learn through adversity. We know this.
What concerns me most is the regression. I'll be honest. What concerns me most is I thought that even if the offense had started slow and picked up, I would have been a lot more optimistic about that. But I didn't see anything that they can one hang their hat on, and two, I'm not even sure what they're building on. If like I really don't understand what they're even trying. Like I said, the identity is not there. I think that's problematic. I think 18 games is enough time to be able to at least start seeing foundational things. And
If you
just
can't,
like I said, simple NFL adaptions, right?
if you
Realizing
can't,
that teams get tape on you because after week 5, 6, all of the great things we saw from Ryan Grubb went away. And to me, that is a giant red flag that when teams do figure you out, you don't have a counter, or at least are not even willing to try. Because I agree, the offensive line is bad, right? Okay. Let's say he tries to do a bunch of different things, but they don't work. They didn't even try. They still maintained shotgun over 70% of the snaps.
But
They
no,
did
but
not
teams
even
aren't
try.
running, but teams aren't going under center a lot more than that, right? The teams aren't under center nearly as much as they used to be. I love it under center. I think you have a lot more options when you do that. I agree with you. Here's the problem though. If you can't throw deep if you don't have time, right? You can't run the ball if you can't run block. They could barely block enough to throw in the short game. And so if you're that limited in your play calling, you're either going to run the ball for very few yards, or you're going to have to go short because you can't block long enough to go long. And you have a quarterback who is admittedly not very good. As he gets pressured, he makes mistakes at times, right? Most quarterbacks do, but Geno very clearly makes mistakes at times when he's under pressure. You're hamstrung as a play caller in that situation. Like that's my question is what could he have done? I understand that he
Quick
didn't
game.
adjust nearly as well. They
Quick.
ran tons of quick game though.
They really didn't actually.
They, from what I saw, they did. I don't know what the numbers say. I feel like they ran a lot more screens than I'm used to seeing.
Well, screens, yeah, but just in terms of your intermediate to short routes. For example, there are way too many third and fours that like everybody's running 12-yard routes.
Yeah, that's a
Too many
mistake.
times.
That's
Too
a
many
mistake.
times, and it didn't change.
That's a mistake, right? You have two quick wide receivers in Lockett and JSN. I think running crossers with those guys would work, right? I think you can run bunch formations, and DK is so big that you have guys hiding behind DK literally if you wanted to. I agree. I think that Grubb, I'm not saying Grubb was a great play caller this year by any means. He was below average. But I just think that it's again, I think offensive line is more important, might be the most important unit in football. If you don't have an offensive line that's cohesive, right, that's healthy, and that has talent, it's really hard to play really, really good offensive football unless you have Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady.
The
And
tackles
even
were,
then, was
well,
that?
well, I was just gonna say, but the tackles were still left on islands at a really high percentage.
Yeah. Well, part of that too, though, is you have, I don't know, there's philosophies of we're gonna get the ball out quicker. Like Mike Martz with the Rams used to do that, where he left his tackles on islands, but he was just like, I'm gonna get the ball out before you can get to my quarterback.
But
I
that's
don't
not
think
the
that's
case.
I
Yeah,
don't think that's necessarily what Grubb was doing. We talked about it. I would have loved to see two tight ends, put Farrell Brown on one side and put AJ Barner on the other, and even keep, Charbonnet in the backfield, whatever you're doing. But make sure Geno is clean, right? I agree. I would have loved to see that too. I just again, I don't love Ryan Grubb, but I do think that it's the smart move would be to give him another year to see what you have and to give him an opportunity to mature because I think his growth was stunted because the offensive line was so bad.
yeah, I'll agree with the last statement. I don't think that that means you are obligated to be able to give him that shot, though. It's the
I don't think
NFL. It's about
I don't think
respect.
you're obligated. I think it would be the smart thing to do though.
I disagree. I think that'd be one of the worst things they could. I think they need NFL experience while Mike MacDonald tries to figure out who he. I think he's still trying to figure out his processes and his systems. He
He
talks
has
about it. He's
he
figuring it
has
out. Even that.
he has
No,
1 year experience.
he's still figuring it out. I
Don't
think
say
he.
Ryan Grubb has 1 year experience.
Yes, they do. But you saw some clear indicators of improvement and adjustment, right? You say that you're saying that there's nothing that they could do because the offensive line is so bad. There are very clearly things that you can do to protect the offensive line that they opted not to do,
Sure.
particularly running the ball. And they chose to do that and be stubborn about that, despite frankly everything telling them to do the opposite direction, and despite the fact that they would talk about these things and say that they need to change, and then nothing would actually ever change. And so I think that I think I'm not evaluating things in a vacuum. I'm not saying because he didn't have immediate results, you should fire him. I think the context of the results that you got, how you got there, and the flashes that you saw throughout should matter. And those things to me don't equal giving me enough confidence that another year is going to make the difference. I think in 3 years, Ryan Grubb could be a great offensive coordinator. I do not think the Seahawks have 3 years to give him to become that.
So you think with the changes that they make on the offensive side of the ball next year that they should be a Super Bowl contending team? or would be a Super Bowl contending team?
I need to know what changes they're making.
Are there changes they could realistically make to make them a Super Bowl contending team?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I actually think so.
Is
I
it,
actually think
does
so.
that include quarterback or no?
It doesn't. No, I think it includes offensive line for sure. It includes. I think they've got to get a little bit more talent. I think they got to shake up the wide receiver room a little bit. I'm not saying that means trading DK, but even if you're not trading DK, I think you do need another piece that from Tyler Lockett. You probably need another type of wide receiver there. No matter what the system is, I think JSN and Tyler Lockett kind of do the same sort of thing, so you're a little bit redundant in that way. I think tight end, but offensive line, upgrade tight end, and frankly, probably enough type of running back I'd like to get. People are gonna hate that, or people are gonna hate getting another running back, but
Mhm.
K9 is injured in and out of the lineup, and running backs in general are just kind of injury prone. Like it's a
Right.
tough position to stay healthy at. Like to see them do that, but there are some tweaks that I think they can make because I frankly think this defense played like a top five defense for long stretches of the season. I think they can be a top five defense. I think,
Well, speaking of continuity, right? Like you put all these talented players together on the defense for a full off season, a full year of Ernest Jones, right? A full year of experience for Byron Murphy, a full year of experience for Tyrese Knight, maybe, a more serious Reek Woolen next year. I think you're right. This might be the best defense in football next year. I think that
could be.
honestly, the outside of coaching, the biggest addition to this team was Ernest Jones.
Yep.
Ernest Jones, the defense completely changed its identity the minute Ernest Jones stepped on the field, right? And so I tend to agree. I think I asked the question, but I do think it could be a Super Bowl contending team. I do. I think you
I
have to
think so
make
too.
I think you have to really make every offensive line decision correctly for that to happen. And I agree. I think say you bring in a young, athletic wide receiver three, like a second, third round pick type of wide receiver who has tremendous raw talent. I then I think I would use that and have that be my backup plan to DK if DK leaves, but to also be a player that can contribute right away. I think that makes the offense a much more explosive offense, right? Not that Lockett played poorly, but if you have someone who scares the other team at that third wide receiver, that's big. The other thing is we haven't really seen a threatening tight end in a long time.
Right.
And I think that could change the calculus of the offense as well. So I agree. And I do think, as time moves on, I think I'll look more kindly on Geno for this year. And I do think you re-sign him. You can play hardball with him a little. I don't
Yeah.
think you re-sign him to a huge contract. And I think it's like something like a 1 year contract with a club option for a second year sort of thing, right? Or something like that. Or a 2 year contract knowing that you might bring in a rookie and have him apprentice for a year.
Right.
But yes, I think the bones are there. I think the only disagreement we have obviously is do you retain Ryan Grubb, and
Mhm.
what does that mean? For
Right.
me, the other thing is I would love to see them commit to, and I'm going to sound so old when I say this. I would love to see them commit to running the ball a lot more and trying to control the clock, right? Because if you have a team that methodically goes down the field and you have a defense that is this explosive and this strong and this tough, the opposing offense is going to have a tremendous issue trying to score if this defense can stay fresh, right? And we've seen times where the defense gets worn down a little bit because it just has to be rescue the offense over and over again. But when they're fresh, when they're put in positions to succeed, the defense this year even has been incredible. So I would love to see more ball control. I would love to see more running game. I think establishing the running game opens up the play action. You can take shots deep that way. I think you're right. The commitment into the run is, I think, step one once you get your offensive line in place. We're going to establish the run knowing we can pass eventually. I'd love to
I think
take that approach.
I think where we disagree is I don't think Ryan Grubb has it in him. I don't think he'll ever be that guy. And that's why I say there's a philosophical difference. Because I do think that I don't know if Mike MacDonald leans as far in that direction as you do. We got to see that. But I do think he's way closer to that than he is to shotgun, throw it all over the field, no matter the circumstances. And we're doing that and we're not even getting explosive plays. So I think to me, that's where the philosophical difference comes in. I think if you asked Mike MacDonald to pick a side, he'd lean ball control because he does trust his defense. And that's where I don't think you're ever going to get that. Even you personally preferring Ryan Grubb, I don't think that's who Ryan Grubb is.
Well, think about it this way though. One of the so two things. One is that everything we heard from players about Ryan Grubb is that he listens and he's willing to take players' feedback about play calling and things like that, and that he's flexible and he wants to learn. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, again, I go back to kind of life experience or work. If you go to someone and you say, here's the deal, you've been underperforming or you haven't been really giving us what we need from you. And I'm going to give you another, I want to see you succeed. I'm going to give you another opportunity to, demonstrate what you're capable of and to do the job. But here's what I'm going to need from you, right? If Mike MacDonald goes to Ryan Grubb and he says, we gave you a year, we ran too much shotgun, we didn't know what the offense was. I'm telling you right now, we're giving you another year, but here's what I need to see for you to continue. It's going to be, you're going to run the ball a lot more, right? We're going to script the first 20 plays, 15 plays of the game. You're going to run the ball a lot more. We're going to become a more physical team, whether you like it or not. And you're going to stay away from what seemed to be comfortable to you last year, which is running out of shotgun with no play action and no kind of misdirection or anything like that. You're going to do something very different, right? If they approach him in that manner, to me, what I know about Ryan Grubb is that he's going to try to do that. That's what the players have said he's like. That's what management said he's like. He's a very open-minded, humble sort of dude. And if he can do that, if they approach him and he can do that, I think that's a huge positive. And to me, again, that's the route that I would take is to approach him and just let him know this is what it's going to be like next year. And if it's not, we're going to have to bring in somebody else.
You don't think they said something similar at the bye week?
No, I don't. I know that
Mike
publicly
MacDonald said that they
they
said
said
that.
some things, but they didn't say it in those terms, not quite in those terms. And then the other thing is it's hard to implement a new philosophy on offense midstream. But you tell him that at the beginning of the offseason, you tell him that in his exit interview at the end of the season, right? When you're recapping and you just say, this is what you're going to work on and this is what I need you to come to training camp with or come to mini camp with is a whole new book of running plays and a whole different philosophy and a whole bunch more play action, a whole bunch more under center. He'll do it.
You're
You
going to
can't,
ask the guy to completely change who he is as a play caller
that's
and
not completely
his
changing
entire
him.
scheme.
We saw lots of other stuff at UW and we saw a lot of different stuff at Fresno State and before that. He was much more running game focused. I'm telling you, I believe
At Fresno State, yes, he was, but
I think
in
so
the
much of what he
NFL,
did was that the offensive line was just bad. I think it was dictated to him because this line was so bad. I really do. And we can
I'm
disagree.
not disagreeing that the line was bad. You're not going to hear me disagree that the line wasn't bad. I'm just saying NFL experience tells you how to navigate those situations better than Ryan Grubb has. And Ryan Grubb has to figure it out on his own. It's going to take longer. It's
But
going to
if
take longer.
you hire someone with no NFL experience, you can't expect him to operate as if he has NFL experience.
Yeah, and I think that was their mistake.
Okay. That's
I
fair.
do. I think that was their mistake. I think they needed to lean a little bit more. I get the innovative upside. I think they needed a little bit more complementary aspects because I think the highs and the lows that this team has been through didn't have to be quite as high and low as they were,
Yep.
and as volatile as it was, and it felt at times had they had, Mike McDonald really wanted to turn over the offense to just let them do their own thing.
Hmm.
And I think with a brand new play call in the NFL, that just wasn't possible.
Yep.
And so I think Mike MacDonald seemed to get more involved as the season went on, but frankly, the offense seemed to regress. So I'm not sure how to think of that and how to process that because the results were not kind. But anywho,
No,
we digress.
I
We'll
think
see.
we
It'll
just
definitely be interesting what
I
they
think you're
do.
right. sorry,
Or
sorry to interrupt. I think you're
no,
right that, they wanted to turn the offense over to someone
yeah.
and let Mike MacDonald focus on the defense.
Mhm.
And that was the wrong choice. If that was the approach you wanted to take, you needed to shell out for a Ben Johnson. Not that he was coming, but you needed to shell out for an offensive coordinator who was, I hate to say it, but like a Kingsbury sort of dude, right? Who has that kind of experience. And I don't love Kingsbury, but I'm saying someone who
Right.
has tons of experience playing, calling plays like that, who can come in and feels comfortable running that unit. You
Commanders are in the playoffs. So to your
But you did
point,
right, but you didn't set him you didn't set Ryan Grubb up to succeed by expecting him to come in and essentially be a second head coach with the offense. What he needed was more direction, more time, more mentorship before being in that position. So yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
I Either way, if you find somebody better for the position,
So let's
you,
say Doug Peterson comes available. You
I'm
don't want
not
that?
no. I don't I think Doug Peterson went on a heater with the Eagles and they played well. He was a good coach. When I look at Jacksonville, I didn't see innovation out of Jacksonville, right? You can make the argument that he had one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. Talented quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm not saying he's great, but I'm saying the raw tools in Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence coming out was just a half notch below Andrew Luck.
I think that was very much so overhyped, and I feel like the
I don't.
NFL has
I
proven
think the
otherwise.
arm. He's got the arm talent. He's got
He's
the arm
got arm
talent,
talent. Um,
and he can run. Right? The difference in talent between him and Justin Herbert is not that much.
I
But I
just
think the coaching has been horrible for him. It's
I
coaching, right? He's shell shocked. He's shell shocked. He's not tough, right? What I'm saying though is he's immensely talented, and Peterson was brought in to bring the talent out of Trevor Lawrence. And I don't think you can blame Trevor Lawrence for getting, just he gets assaulted every game in the pocket because they couldn't block. And their offensive scheme wasn't great. So what I'm saying is Peterson, to me, I get the idea of Doug Peterson. I don't think he's the answer. I would rather have another year of Ryan Grubb than have Doug Peterson come in and be the new offensive coordinator.
I disagree. I don't love Doug Peterson at coach for sure. I mean head coach, but I think giving him the chance to actually just focus on the offense, he's much better. I think at that than trying to be the head guy. I don't think he'll work out as a head coach in the NFL. But I do think he's good offensive mind, especially when that's just his focus. There's quite a few prospects I'm interested in this cycle that could potentially become available. And I'm interested to see what that looks like. Mike MacDonald is known to be a cutthroat, if you will. Um, and so it would not surprise me if they went in a different direction. But if they do decide to stick it out, we'll see ultimately what that looks like. But
I'm team roll with Grubb.
I can't. I'm team. I think they waste the season if they do.
Your team jettisoned him to the sun. That's what you
I
want.
jettison him to some other team. I'd love to see him do well in a longer
That's
term.
not here.
Because you're right. I think you're right. I think they expected. I really do think he was brought in under realistic circumstances. Like the learning curve that it would take for him, I don't think was taken into consideration. I think they really did kind of expect him to plug and play. And frankly, I think he expected to plug and play based on the offense he's been running. I think
Right.
he expected to plug and play his offense, even when he was asked in pressers, the differences he pretty much downplayed a lot of the differences that there would be between the NFL and what he ran and was used to before. Um, so anyway, I just don't double down on that is all. But there'll be more to this season. We didn't even get a chance to really talk about Geno, and he's our other hot topic guy.
This,
We did both say, go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just gonna say for listeners, we did not plan this. There was no outline that said talk about Ryan Grubb for 45 minutes. This is just where we went.
No, I actually got quite different. I really want to talk about Mike MacDonald more, but I think since we were both on the same page about that,
All right.
we ended up debating more what we are not on the same page about, which is cool. Like it's good to you need a little bit of both, and you guys will all be bored to death if we all agreed
Yep.
about literally everything together. It wouldn't be that good of a podcast. So
Right.
you can see the differences for sure in opinion. And speaking of same, I do think though you hinted that you do think Geno will be back.
Mm.
I do think we should talk about that because those are really the three hot button topics that people are talking about. It's Mike MacDonald. Was this year a success or was it a failure? It's
Mhm.
Ryan Grubb. What do you do with him? Do you keep him? Do you let him go? And
Mhm.
it's Geno Smith. Is he a guy that can get you over the mediocre hump? Excuse me. My opinion is that he can.
Mhm.
But I do think the circumstances matters. I think it's the same thing with Sam Darnold, who some people would prefer instead of Geno Smith. I think it's the same thing. The circumstances matter. They're the same type of quarterback. Baker Mayfield, they're the same type of quarterback. And while Geno underperformed compared to those other two this year, I think most people would just look at the stats and say, oh, well, those guys can do better. When in reality, the circumstances, they matter.
Right. So let me say this. Darnold had Aaron Jones, right?
Right.
Had Justin Jefferson, had Jordan Addison. Okay, which you compare to K9 and Charbonnet, compared to Aaron Jones, I'd say Jones is very good. I would say that that's pretty close. You compare Jefferson and Addison to DK and JSN. I think Jefferson is so much better than everyone else except for Jamar Chase that that leans slightly to the Vikings. You take um you take Mike Evans and what is now McMillan and uh the receiver that got hurt, and then you take Bucky Irving, who was the best rookie running back in football, and you look at those guys, the difference, I think across the board, skill position wise, all three of those teams are pretty equal, right? They're pretty balanced and have a lot of talent at each of the skill positions. The difference between the Vikings, the Buccaneers, and the Seahawks on offense is the Buccaneers and the Vikings have above average offensive lines. That's the difference. And so
Yeah, they do. I think that's fair to say. I definitely think, and I think Kevin O'Connell. I frankly give him the most credit for Sam Darnold.
yes,
Sam Darnold's been in
he's
some
a
good
very good
situations.
coach. He's a very
Yeah,
good coach. And Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers, is going to be up for head coaching jobs next year.
yeah,
But I guess my point is that I completely agree. I think Geno and Baker and Darnold are at the same very similar level in as far as talent, and all three of them need very good players around them to succeed. The difference is those two had coaches that were better coaches this year, quite frankly. But the
mhm.
biggest thing to me is they had offensive lines that would protect them, and they had running games that were good because the offensive line could block, which opened up the passing game for them. They were not operating under duress in the same way Geno did all year.
We'll disagree slightly in the refrain that I think Charbonnet actually showed that he could have success in the running game, despite I think they've had opportunities where the running game was actually working and they still didn't lean into it. So I would disagree slightly there because I
Okay.
do think that Charbonnet's had some real games and showed some real flashes, even if it didn't amount to you know stacking numbers where he only had 8 carries, but he averaged, like I said, 6.9 yards a carry. I mean, that's yeah, yeah. But Kevin O'Connell the same way in that he is similar in Ryan Grubb, where he just wants to pass, like he'll abandon the run also. But they've got a system and a scheme and an identity that sort of works around. They figured out the tweaks and the things that the counters to make that work over the span of a season. Whereas Ryan Grubb still has very much so a lot to figure out in that regard, if he can do it.
Right.
Um, so I think though going back to Geno, that people, I think in general, people fans of the NFL tend to be hostages of the moment, I think, more often than not. And I think that that's pretty much what this whole Geno situation is. I think people lump this season in together with previous seasons. And I'm not really sure that I think I would say that this is probably the worst set of circumstances that he's been in.
Mhm.
Um, and that's because we disagree about the coaching. But I would say this is the worst of the circumstances he's been in, and frankly, it's the worst play that we've gotten out of him. Geno's known for to be a gunslinger, but we've seen him typically be able to get more touchdowns to offset the interceptions. That's the difference, really, because I think Jordan Love also has had a similar. He's had a high number of interceptions as well, and so people would still take Jordan Love, but he's got the touchdowns
Right.
to offset that. And Geno has struggled in the red zone. Now, I will say that's one critique that I think is probably been my biggest concern with Geno, and that is the red zone inconsistencies across coach have been alarming. And I think that if there's something that I think ultimately holds Geno back from being able to take this team on a deep playoff run, it might be that. Because um, I think there are certain things you can do to help that and to curb it. But I naturally think that he's best getting touchdowns off explosives as opposed to in that condensed space.
Right.
I don't know what it is about it, but
Well, and also if you can run the ball in a condensed space, you open up so many more like opportunities in the passing game, right? And the really good teams, the offensives with the really good running games can line up and say, we got two tight ends and a fullback, and we're still going to run the ball and we're going to get 5 yards, right? I think that type of thing could help Geno tremendously. He was backed into a corner because of the play calling and the lack of formation variety, and it forced him to into a place that's he's not good, right? Or he's not going to excel if he's set up that way. But I guess ultimately the question is, if they have sights on a deep playoff run, meaning you think there's a slight possibility they can go to the Super Bowl, is he the quarterback? And then the question also is, if you keep him for 25, are you holding up the progress of the team in 26 and 27 by not getting started with that new quarterback right away?
I don't think so. I just don't think I don't think highly of the prospects this year. Now, I will say this. If there were more options at the quarterback position,
Talking about
I
the
think I'd
draft.
be much more inclined to take the risk, given that I think there is potential to be a lot of change on the offensive side of the ball anyway. And like I was saying with the continuity, I think if you are going to shake things up, this is probably a good window if that's an option. But I don't have any confidence that you're going to find anything better than Geno at this point. I just don't. I think even if people would say, oh, go get Sam Darnold or go get Justin Fields, to me, that just leaves one big giant question mark. I think there's at least a clear floor with Geno that exists that I think matters when you're still trying to compete in the NFC West, when you still see yourself frankly, as a contender moving forward. I think the 49ers downfall is not just a one-off year. I think they're aging and I think they're going to have to, and they've always got some cap stuff, but their aging is real.
Right.
And the regression, I think, is real, especially with that new Brock Purdy contract that's about to hit.
Right.
So, uh, I
This,
think this is the time that the Seahawks can capitalize
Mhm.
on those things. And
Mhm.
because of that, I think the floor Geno gives you is better than some people say they'd rather just blow the whole thing up. I think you got too much talent on defense
Yep.
to blow the whole
And
thing up.
and on offense for that matter, right? There
Yeah,
there is talent on offense.
correct.
I agree. I like Shador Sanders and Cam Ward are the 1 and 2 quarterbacks coming out. I like Cam Ward a lot. I think Cam Ward is a bit underrated right now, and I think he could be a very, very good quarterback in the NFL. Problem is with this class, say Cam Ward or Shador Sanders hits their ceiling is only slightly above where Geno Smith is right now, right?
Right.
It might be a little bit above, but it's
Yeah.
not superstar. And so if you're not going to bring in a superstar, why upset the apple cart, right? If you're going to bring Darnold in, it's going to be at a high number, a much
Mhm.
higher number than Geno's going to be willing to sign for, right? Because he's looking for to cash in and this to be a big, big contract for him. He's not better than Geno Smith. And so I think you're right. In some ways, you're stuck with Geno Smith, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing. You don't make a change at quarterback for the sake of change. You might
Yes.
be able to do it at guard, or you might be able to do it at off-ball linebacker or strong safety or something like that. but doing it at quarterback is a death wish as far as I'm concerned. So I think
Correct.
we see him. I think we see him sign a 2-year deal. I think they're going to want to sign him to a 1-year deal. He's going to want to, they'll say, we'll give you two, but at a lower AAV or average annual value. And I think they look for their successor in year 2 of that contract
Yep.
between 25 and 26, unless someone comes available. And to be honest, that doesn't bother me at all. I think Geno coming back next year is a good thing. It's you're giving him one last shot to really win with this team. And if
Yeah.
you can set him up with an offensive line that's a mix of experience and maybe a really talented rookie, I think we could see really big things from this offensive line. The other thing is quarterbacks don't age in the same way they used to because they don't get hit the same way they used to. We see quarterbacks play into, their late 30s and still be effective. I know Aaron Rodgers looked like trash this year, but
No, no, I was saying Gino does.
uh,
Gino still gets hit at the rate that you used to.
yes, he gets hit a lot, but I think he's the type of quarterback because he's so cerebral that can play until he's 36, right? And still see very high end production. So my answer is you sign him to 2 years, you guarantee him 1 year, at least 1 year of starting. You let him know he's going to be mentoring someone in the future and maybe he has a future coaching or in the front office with this team. You're a part of this organization for life. If you want to be, we're invested in you. Come in. We're going to give you one more year of being the man. At least one more year of being the man. Let's see what we can do. That'd be my
Yeah,
approach.
I think that's fair. I would say, because I will say, no matter what the circumstances, I think Gino's got to be better. And I think it's got to be significantly better in
Yep.
terms of the turnovers and all of that. And he's got one more shot. And
Yep.
even for me, who, like you said, I like Gino. I think that he's flawed for sure, but I also think that fans don't watch other quarterbacks as closely, so they're not as aware of other quarterbacks' flaws as much as they are Geno's flaws. And so every other quarterback looks better than Geno because you're just not watching the other quarterbacks and you're not paying attention to what they struggle with and when teams are able to scheme them bad and. So I just think that you take your lumps, give it one more shot. And I think it's worth that because I do believe that this team has a Super Bowl contender cap. Most people feel like because there's a team that's been 9-8, 9-8, 9-8, that's the cap. And I think that's far from the truth. I think you're so much closer now than you've ever been to breaking past that ceiling. And it would seem to me short-sighted to right on the precipice of really being able to get somewhere and really be able to like reach that mark. It would just be frustration from all of the previous years before and saying, oh, screw it, blow the whole
Mhm.
thing up. I think that's
Mhm.
very short-sighted and would ultimately be, you know, could lead to the 90 Seahawks all over again, depending on how they did that.
Right. No, I think you're completely right. And it's again, we say this every week, and we will say this every week until the first game in 25. It's going to come down to that offensive line.
Yeah.
It really is going to come down. And that's what I'm looking for in this offseason. And we'll talk a lot more about it in upcoming episodes. But I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for that first offensive line signing. How many resources are you going to put into it, right? How much of this draft? I'm going to be glued to the draft. How much of this draft are you going to utilize, of your draft resources you're going to utilize on this offensive line? I think you got to throw as much as you can at it because you're pretty good everywhere else. The other question, we don't have to address it today, is it the right thing to do to bring back DK? And if you do eventually sign him to an extension, is are you comfortable? Because it's going to have to be probably top 5 wide receiver money to bring him back, just because that's the cycle, right? The next guy signs for the next, great amount. Are you comfortable bringing him back at top 5 money and taking up that portion of the cap? Given his propensity to run sloppy routes, right? And put the team in danger because of those sloppy routes. His propensity to get huge penalties in really bad moments. Is he worth it? Is the threat of DK deep and the physicality of DK worth it to you and what he brings to the team identity, right? From a physicality standpoint, is it worth it? I think I lean to, yes, I think he is a big part of this team. And I think you would miss him a lot more than you would realize if he was gone, right? You would realize the things that he does for this team. That's hard for me to say because there are times where I want him gone because he's a knucklehead or, because he's not producing in the way that we get used to. But ultimately, I think you bring him back too, even if it is top five money.
Yeah, I'm eager to talk about this because I think I've changed my tune. I'm still on
You
the
ready to
fence.
get rid of
I
him?
gotta. I think I've changed my tune. I didn't think that would happen. I didn't think. I really did
Really?
not think it would happen. But if
Huh.
there is a shakeup that would happen, I am okay. I'm more okay. I'll say this. I'm more okay with letting DK go than Geno.
Mhm.
And I think you can. I think it's more likely that you see a turnaround from Geno than DK. I kind of think DK is who he is.
And you don't think he'll change?
Not at this point.
Huh.
Not at this point.
But
I
what
think
do
he's
you,
had more coaches. I think he's been in more schemes. I think he's. I mean, he's been the starter through it all, far longer than Geno's been a starter, double the time. In fact, I think we're year six, right?
Mhm.
Uh, I think there's a larger sample size, and in fact, I think there's been regression in some areas that DK is just who he is, and I think potentially a different coach can help get him a little bit closer to that year he had 13, was that sophomore year, 1,300 yards or what have you. I think that's possible. You could get him closer to that, but I'm not sure if even that is going to be worth you're paying him $30 million. Him and Gino will be like it won't be
what
that.
is what are you replacing him with though?
That's my one dilemma. That's my one dilemma. I don't feel passionate about this because I've been team keep DK this whole
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
But in terms of a shakeup, what can you do that changes this team? Frankly, it's part of the ceiling of this. People maybe disagree with this, but I think you could argue that part of the ceiling on this offense has been more because your number one wide receiver has a clear ceiling. And if we're still considering him number one over JSN, I think he's had a ceiling over him. And I think there are more flaws in DK than there. People are going to disagree. I just think there are more flaws in DK's game that actively hurts the game. Geno has a turnover problem sometimes when he's under pressure. That's
Mhm.
his biggest flaw. But
Mhm.
it's also sometimes his biggest asset because we've seen him make some real big plays and some
Absolutely.
game-changing plays off that. DK running poor routes
Yeah.
as one led to some of the Geno turnovers.
Well, I'll say too though. I think the knock one of the knocks on DK was he couldn't run the full route tree because he wasn't quick enough, mobile
Right,
enough, right? That DK was going to run go balls and that's all he could do.
right,
And then we saw him be able to run some different routes and he looked a little better.
right.
I think he's at his best when he's either running, hitches or he's running deep routes. And I don't think there's a whole in between is where we saw him make mistakes, right? Where he has to be precise. I think so for me, I go back to trying to put him in positions for him to succeed, which is having a more limited route tree, but just have using his physicality, right, in his routes. But the big thing that I think we would miss if DK was gone is they talk about this with Steph Curry, right? The gravitational pull
Oh yeah.
towards Steph changes the entire Golden State offense and how teams approach him and that team defensively because you have to account for him at every place across half court, right? I think DK is the same way, and we don't always pay attention to it. But the threat of DK downfield and where the safeties line up because of the threat of DK Metcalf, I think is a huge portion of what this offense should be moving forward, right? He is such a threat downfield that it takes two guys to cover him when he runs a go ball, and no one's sticking with him man to man. And if they do run man on him, you better throw him the ball every time, right? So if he's taking the safety away and freeing up JSN on the other side or underneath, or if you have that other threat, right, that we talked about, to me, that's really important to this offense. And I think you have to replace him with someone else who is going to be threatening in a similar fashion. And we would miss that tremendously, I think, if he was gone.
I think for sure, because like I said, that's why I struggle with this. I love DK. I do. I love DK. He's a knucklehead, but I love him. I really do. I'm a big fan of the guy, but he doesn't play his size. So even though his biggest asset is drawing that extra attention, he doesn't do a good job of high pointing the ball.
Right.
He doesn't do a good job of making contested catches. He still catches with his body far too often. Like so,
He
even though
posts
he's
guys up
going,
more than he high points.
you know,
He posts guys up more than he high points.
yeah.
Mhm.
So he doesn't really even take advantage, frankly, of others people take advantage of his presence, but he doesn't take advantage of the opportunities that he gets when he does get uh one-on-one routes. I've seen him absolutely like not even try to sell a route. Like just make it like sometimes it's even the nuances with how he runs the route. Like he chooses to not just drift on a route or whatever. Sometimes he will not try to sell it, one thing versus the other. Uh
Mhm.
really not even just lift up his arms out enough to grab over a defender, right? And it leads to an interception. So even when there are opportunities where he's there, and if there has been one hard reality that I've come to, it's been that maybe I'm a little bit more willing to walk away from DK than I would have ever thought I would be.
Mhm.
I've been avid that you need DK, but frankly, how they looked without DK, JSN didn't look that bad. And I know that that's a smaller sample size than over the course of an entire NFL season. But DK is also not the only dude in the NFL who attracts double coverage.
Sure.
There are other resources and other wide receivers in this league, especially now, where receivers are becoming quickly and quiet as kept, like the where the running back, where they're like a dime a dozen.
Right, right,
I think you can find may not be able to duplicate that exact thing because the physical specimen of DK
right.
is sometimes what puts fear in teams. You
That's
may
the
not have
attraction.
that, but I think is the physical specimen of DK Metcalf worth $30 million? If you told me no, I wouldn't be mad at it.
Right. Well, and you look at like as an example, Jalen McMillan is picked by the Bucks and it is essentially their third or fourth receiver coming into the season. Goodwin gets hurt, or Godwin, excuse me, gets hurt, and McMillan has become not a star, but a very, very good wide receiver, right? He wasn't a first round pick.
Nope.
And you look at, I just pulled up a mock draft, right? And you got, different body types. You've got McMillan from Arizona, who's 6'5" and a high point type of guy. You've got Luther Burden the third out of Missouri, who's more of a, fast yak sort of dude. But you go through, Abuka from Ohio State. I hope they don't take another Ohio State dude, but he's a very, very good number two receiver. You go down this list, there's always wide receiver talent coming out of college, right? And you got to hit on it. But it wouldn't be, I'll say this, as long as they reinvest all of that money into the offensive line,
Yes,
I'm
I
good,
agree.
right? If you can go out and sign, all pro caliber guard or right tackle and somebody else, a slightly above average wide receiver next to JSN and a very good offensive line will take this team a heck of a lot further than a poor offensive line of DK Metcalf.
Yep. I
And
think
I
that's where I
think
stand.
that's what needs to start. That's the conversation that needs to start happening. The problem is it's no guarantee that you're bringing in Quentin Nelson, right? It's no
Right.
guarantee that the lineman you bring in is going to be great.
Right.
But I also think that's the formula. We get back to Mike MacDonald. That's the formula he wants for this team. I don't know that he cares about having the explosive, incredible physical wide receiver as much as he cares about controlling the line of scrimmage and being able to be multifaceted on offense and be able to run the game when you need or run the ball when you need to. So my heart says keep DK.
Yep.
My I love him. He's such a character. He's such an interesting, unique player. You fall in love with the physicality and the deep speed,
Yep.
and the fire. I can
Yep.
make the case that he draws two players in the secondary, and that's great, and that frees JSN up. But as we talk it through, if you go out and you can promise me that this line goes from being one of the worst historically of all time to above average, now you're setting Geno up to succeed, right? you may not be able to run all the deep stuff you did with DK. But now if you're running more short game, more slants, more crossing routes, right? More interesting stuff over the middle, it, that's a more effective team. That is you're giving yourself a better chance to make the Super Bowl that way. So as we talk it through, if they re-sign him, they re-sign him and I'll support it.
Correct.
But there is something very attractive to me about putting those resources towards that line.
Yep, that was it. The more I've thought it through, I'm
Mhm.
exactly, yeah. That's pretty much what I ended up doing. The more I thought about it, the more I'm like, that's a lot of money
Yep.
for a guy that's that flawed. Every other guy getting that much money doesn't come with nearly the amount of flaws that DK does. As talented as he is.
There's not a single route that you ask Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson to run or even like a Stephon Diggs, right? There's not a single route you ask those guys to run that they're not good at. CeeDee Lamb, they can run the entire route tree and they can create separation with the entire route tree.
Yep,
That's just not who. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was pigeonholed into being just a slot receiver, has proven he can do it all, right? And those are the guys that you're comparing him against because that's the kind of money he's going to get.
yep.
Yeah, I don't. And it's I don't know enough about offensive football to say, but I assume it's also limiting to your um, offensive play calling if you have a receiver that can't run the whole route tree effectively, right? I don't know. I hate to
Well,
say it, but yeah, I'm walking down that same. I'm right behind you. You're about half a mile in front of me, but I'm right behind you in that path to saying, maybe we should do something different.
yeah, yeah, it's tough. Especially, I think too. I actually do think this. If they keep Ryan Grubb, you can't keep DK. That's gonna sound crazy, but I think I can't remember if I brought this up when you were on or not. I know I brought this on our previous episode, but DK's talked about he brought up something, it was really early in the season.
Mhm.
He basically mentioned that Sanjay Lau was much more, he challenged him more from a technical standpoint of how he ran routes, where exactly he ran those routes, and
Mhm.
that was different at Ryan Grubb. And at the time I sort of still took it as a little bit of an insult,
Yeah.
but I think he was trying to make it sound like a compliment.
No.
I don't think you can give DK that freedom. Someone like DK struggles with that freedom. Someone like JSN, who is a natural great route runner,
Yep.
thrives in
Yep.
that environment. And so I don't think you're ever going to get the best out of DK unless you bring back Sanjay Lau, I guess, under this particular regime. Even though the deep threat is what Ryan Grubb would love, I'm not sure that you can't find another really fast guy to do that for
Right.
you, as opposed to, someone who, if you need guys to be able to be better route runners, and I think Ryan Grubb does. I think that's shown in his system, right?
He,
I'm not
oh,
sure DK's the guy that you continue to move forward with in that
I
case.
have one other thing about Grubb before we get out. Did you watch Michael Penix on Sunday night against the Commanders when it was a
No, I didn't have
Commanders?
the heart.
So
I was already
admittedly, I love Michael Penix. I always have. I think people criticize that pick by the Falcons. I thought it was brilliant. I love him.
still
And
criticize the move, but not forgetting him.
we saw we saw some glimpses of like might maybe like the best arm talent outside of Mahomes in football. Like he some of the throws he made were so outstanding. The velocity on the ball. So it was I love him. He might be my favorite NFL quarterback. Anyways, Ryan Grubb had him, right? He had this lefty who could throw the ball anywhere at any point in time, incredible accuracy, pocket passer. That's not really who DK or who Geno is,
Yeah.
right? He had to make an adjustment to a more short and intermediate type passer who's more cerebral, who's not like they're just different quarterbacks, which is ironic because they're very close, Penix and Geno Smith. But it's I think Grubb has to make that adjustment as well. I bring it up because you made the point about DK and DK and Grubb together. Grubb has to realize Michael Penix isn't your quarterback anymore. You need to build your offense around a quarterback with a different skill set. And I think there were times where he was throwing rolling plays out there that he used with Penix and they didn't fit with Geno and the players that he had on this team. That's
Mhm.
one of the adjustments he needs to make too. But I think you're right. It's like a DK is it's a temptation because you see this deep threat and you want to feed him the ball.
Right,
That may not be what's best for your team, but
right.
you feel like you have to feed him 4 deep balls a game because it's DK Metcalf. When that might not be, you might just be wasting 4 downs by doing it. And Ryan Grubb, as we know, gets tempted by that and wants to chuck the ball around in that way at times.
And so does Geno, frankly.
Yes,
He's
yes,
tempted to do those
yes,
same
very much
things,
so.
even
Most
though,
quarterbacks do. Most
yeah,
quarterbacks do.
yep. Even though it's not necessarily, I mean, how many of those interceptions or bad plays came during a DK?
Right,
Too many, probably.
right,
So it's worth noting for sure. But man, it's been an interesting episode. It's really turned into a who should stay and who should go type of episode.
right.
The Rams game is coming up.
Yes.
I think it's important for the team to still win. The Rams starters won't be playing. I think most people will say it doesn't matter. I think it matters for Mike MacDonald optics. I think it matters for, frankly, just division optics. They would have been be 4-2 in the division, if I'm not mistaken, if they win the game against the Rams compared to 2-4 last year. So
I
I
think it's a
think,
win. It's a win-win for me. If they win, that's great. Double-digit wins, 10 wins for Mike McDonald first year, positive momentum going into next year. That's great. If they lose, better draft pick. Still a 9-7 season. You're still or 9-8. You're still above 500. Um, I care
man,
less about optics.
I don't think about I think the draft pick thing is tricky, actually. I don't think I think the highest they can get is 16th, but a lot of people will have to lose. It's a kind of weird situation. More than likely they'll be 18 no matter what.
Whether they win or lose.
Yeah.
Okay, then go win the game. If that's the case, go win the game.
And there are some situations where they can improve their draft, but apparently because they're basically they got the best record without being in the playoffs. I think there's not a lot of nuance in terms of draft movement there.
Right.
Um, so I
I
think,
don't
yeah.
know. Just I think go win the game then, but don't get anybody injured. You
You
know what
don't
I
think
mean?
it's bad if they lose to the second string Rams
I
team?
don't think anybody cares.
Do you think anybody on the Seahawks side cares if they lose to the
A little bit, but not. It's not life or death. I think what's more important is nobody has a injury that leaks into next year.
well, yeah, I'd agree with that. Health,
No, and if say Geno goes out and throws 4 touchdowns and 400 yards, yeah, that's a positive. Or they go out and they run for 225 yards, yeah, that's a positive. But I don't. It's not enough for me to care a ton. I think might be a time to run some different type of play calls on the offensive side of the ball, right? Or you run some blitzes that gives the scouts for next season a different look. Oh, we haven't seen that out of Mike McDonald. That's interesting. We got to prepare for that, right? There's some of that stuff,
I don't want to do that.
but I don't know. I just don't. I'll watch the game because I'm a fan. I don't know how much the outcome truly matters, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want to get swept by the Rams again. Maybe it's a pride thing, division thing. I think Mike McDonald was hired to best McVay and Shanahan, and I think he's done a pretty good job so far. But I do think this game goes a long way, one way or the other, in terms of that narrative, if he really is helping. And I just don't want to get swept by the second
We're
string
not we're
Rams.
not going to we're not going to the Super Bowl. We're not going to playoffs. So why does it matter?
Pride,
No, Pride is going to the Super Bowl. Pride is not finishing second.
pride.
No, There is no pride if you're not making the playoffs and going to
I
the Super
hate the
Bowl.
Rams. I don't want to lose to them under
See, I
any
want to win
circumstance.
everything too. I get it. I'm like that. But I'm just as a fan, if I was playing, I would feel that way. As a fan, hey, if it's one more position in the draft, give me that too. I'm good with that.
Nah, I'm good. I really am not sure that it will make a difference. It seems a little complex, the things I've heard in terms of can they actually improve their draft record. It's
Right.
not clear cut. I'd rather just win and not get swept by the Rams. I just don't want to
Right.
hear them talking crap. Anyway,
That's funny.
that's just me.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we got time for today. We went over a little bit. It's been a good way to start off 2025, good debate, and we've got a lot more to get into as we go throughout the year. Tino, Tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on BlueSky, Tino Jr. 20, TINOJR20. I will post a link next week. We're going to start our positional rankings. Me and Matt Whitlock and Aaron Alvis will start our positional rankings for fantasy baseball. If you're a baseball fan, I'll fire up some Mariners stuff pretty soon here, but really it's still football. The football playoffs been a lot of fun. Rooting for whoever Ohio State plays. I'm a Longhorns fan this week. They better get knocked off. Other than that, like I said, if you want to conversate on BlueSky, hit me up. Please follow the Seahawks 360 pod if you haven't already. I love this. It's always fun. Always.
For sure. Absolutely. Be sure to follow the show on X if you're on X. Follow us at Seahawks 360 pod. Sorry, a little rusty in the year 2025. But we are also on BlueSky, and you can follow us at Seahawks 360. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please subscribe, hit that like button so we can have the algorithm move up and all of that good stuff. But we appreciate you guys listening in, especially if you're listening to the end. That's it. That's all the time we have for today. We're out, and as always,
Go Hawks.